Have you ever wondered what it would be like to move to a town where children vanish without explanation, where shadows seem to breathe, and where something ancient waits beneath the streets? What would you do if you discovered that the place you call home feeds on your deepest fears? Before anything else, if stories like this fascinate you and you want to keep exploring the darkest corners of Stephen King's universe, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave your like, because this journey through Derry is long, disturbing, and you do not want to face it alone. The year is 1962, and Derry, Maine appears to be just another quiet American town, but beneath its ordinary surface, something unspeakable stirs from its slumber. The story opens with a young boy named Matty Clements desperately begging a family in their car to take him away from Derry, his voice filled with panic and terror that no child should ever experience. What happens next defies all logic and reason as the family's behavior shifts from normal to grotesquely disturbing when the mother suddenly gives birth to a mutated creature that launches itself at the helpless boy, turning a simple roadside encounter into a surreal nightmare. This opening sequence establishes the nightmare that It, Welcome to Derry will become. A prequel that does not just connect to the films we know, but expands the mythology of fear itself. 4 months pass after Matty's disappearance, and life in Derry continues as if nothing happened, which is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this cursed town, because the community's indifference feels almost as monstrous as any creature. Major Leroy Hanlon arrives at the Derry Air Force Base with his family, a decorated military officer who believes his new posting will offer stability and opportunity, but he immediately faces hostility and prejudice from racist soldiers who see him as an unwelcome presence, introducing the idea that human hatred and supernatural evil are deeply intertwined in this place. Meanwhile, a young girl named Lillian "Lily" Bainbridge wrestles with profound grief over her father's recent passing in a workplace accident, and she begins experiencing horrifying visions that blur the line between reality and nightmare. As if her trauma has tuned her into a frequency the rest of Derry refuses to hear. Lily sees Matty in her mind, his fingers covered in blood, singing an eerie song that seems to come from somewhere deep underground, connecting her directly to whatever woke beneath the town. Her friends Marge Truman, Teddy Uris, and Phil Malkin initially dismiss her claims as the product of grief and stress, but when Teddy himself experiences a grotesque hallucination of a human lampshade made from skin, they begin to realize that something genuinely wrong permeates their town, and it is not just in Lily's imagination. The group decides to investigate Matty's disappearance and encounters Veronica "Ronnie" Grogan, the daughter of Hank Grogan, who works as a projectionist at the local cinema and lives under the weight of her father's reputation. Ronnie reveals that she too has heard the same disturbing song that haunts Lily's visions, and she knows it comes from the sewers beneath Derry, where something waits in the darkness, turning the town's underground into a kind of subconscious for all its buried horrors. At the military base, Leroy survives an ambush that he initially believes to be the work of foreign agents at the height of the Cold War, but his partner Paulie Russo helps him escape, introducing a grounded political layer to a story that will soon abandon rational explanations. The children's investigation leads them to the movie theater where Ronnie's father works, and what they witness there transforms their understanding of reality itself. During a film screening, the movie suddenly changes to show Matty himself accusing them from the screen, before the same mutated creature from the opening erupts from the projection and attacks everyone in the theater, turning cinema, the place where people escape reality, into the site where reality is most violently rewritten. People around them fall as chaos consumes the room, but Ronnie manages to pull Lily to safety just before the creature can reach her, leaving both girls traumatized and desperate for answers, bound together by a shared brush with something that should not exist. This incident marks the beginning of their true awareness that Derry harbors something far beyond human comprehension, something that has been feeding on the town for generations and using spectacle, illusions, and shared hallucination as weapons. The investigation into the missing children intensifies as police begin to suspect Hank Grogan of involvement in what they treat as human crimes, even though the audience already knows the true culprit is anything but human. Leroy continues to believe that the attack against him was orchestrated by foreign spies, trapped in a military mindset that makes more sense to him than the supernatural, while Sergeant Masters, A bigoted soldier who hates him is imprisoned for the attack, despite his own innocence. Charlotte Hanlon, Leroy's wife and a woman deeply committed to justice, tries to intervene in racial conflicts throughout Derry, but faces constant glares and hostility from adults who seem almost spellbound by their own prejudice, as if the town's evil amplifies the worst in them. Ronnie experiences a vision of her deceased mother, another emotional weak point that the entity exploits to destabilize her. While the military conducts searches through the woods with the help of Dick Halloran, an airman with powerful telepathic and clairvoyant abilities whose shine connects this series to other corners of Stephen King's universe. Native Americans living near Derry observe these operations with deep concern because they know the land's history and understand that disturbing what sleeps beneath it will never end well. Will Hanlon, Leroy and Charlotte's son and future father of Mike Hanlon, struggles to adapt to his new environment at school where he deals with bullying and isolation. But he finds friendship with Ronnie and Cuban-American Rich Santos, whose humor and heart help balance the story's bleakness. Chief Clint Bowers, Derry's corrupt police chief, blackmails Lily over her statement to the authorities, and when Hank is arrested, Ronnie confronts Lily about the lies that may have contributed to her father's situation, adding human tension on top of the supernatural thread. The truth about the military ambush is finally revealed when Masters is cleared, and General Francis Shaw admits he orchestrated the attack as a twisted test of Leroy's ability to face fear. Because Shaw needs someone capable of confronting terror itself to retrieve what he calls a weapon that inspires overwhelming dread. The military discovers a car in the woods filled with bodies, a grotesque marker that allows them to locate this supposed weapon, which is, of course, not a tool, but an ancient predator. The narrative then pushes back in time to 1908, where a young Francis Shaw is pursued through the woods by a terrifying figure that shifts into whatever scares him most, visualizing the idea that this entity does not just kill. It studies, he adapts, and personalizes fear. A Native American girl named Rose rescues Shaw and explains that the creature he encountered is part of a much older story, an entity that existed long before Derry and that has always fed on those who live above it. The two children share a summer bond, but Shaw eventually leaves Derry with trauma that will later twist into obsession when he returns as a powerful officer determined to control what once hunted him. In the present, Lily is discharged from Juniper Hill Asylum, sent there because adults preferred to label her unstable rather than admit that something was wrong with the town itself. She teams up with Ronnie to gather photographic evidence that might prove the entity's existence and clear Hank's name, turning their group into investigators who use cameras the way others might use weapons. When the military fails to find anything useful at the car site, Shaw sends Halloran to use his psychic abilities, triggering visions of wartime death and bodies floating through darkness until Leroy pulls him back from nearly falling out of the helicopter. A powerful image of how close Halloran has to stand to the abyss every time he uses his gift. Shaw later confronts Rose at her pawn shop about a legal threat she sent regarding the excavation, but he hides the mission's true goal, revealing how secrecy and arrogance walk hand in hand in his storyline. The children recruit Will and Rich suggests that the entity might be an evil spiritual being from his cultural background, offering a different mythological lens to interpret what is happening. They attempt a summoning ritual in a cemetery, hoping to lure the entity into view long enough to capture evidence. But when Rich admits he is not sure it will work, they abandon the ritual, only to be chased by horrifying visions of Teddy and Susie appearing like restless spirits who refuse to stay buried. They escape physically, but when they later develop their photos, they find an image that clearly shows a clown figure, the first concrete visual confirmation of the creature that will one day be known as Pennywise. The children bring their photographs to Chief Bowers hoping for help, but when they show him the prints, the spirits and the clown have vanished from the images as if reality itself has been edited, proving that this entity can manipulate not only perception, but evidence. Leroy, trying to be a good father in the middle of chaos, takes Will fishing to bond with him. But what should be a peaceful moment becomes another nightmare when Will has a vision of himself surrounded by flames. A premonition that leaves real burn marks on his body even though no fire is present. Will tells his father there is something evil in Derry and later theorizes with his friends that this force feeds directly on fear, growing stronger the more it terrifies its victims, aligning the show's supernatural logic with Stephen King's larger themes. Charlotte visits Hank in jail, and he finally confesses that on the night in question he was having an affair with a married white woman, explaining his secrecy but also the social risk of telling the truth, which allowed the town to make him an easy suspect. Marge attempts a cruel prank on Lily, trying to reassert social dominance, but the plan turns against her when she is overwhelmed by a vision in which her eyes explode, leaving her actually injured until Lily intervenes to help her, forcing Marge to recognize that fear does not care about high school hierarchies. That same night, Will sees a clown watching him from his bedroom window with a smile that promises pain. And when Leroy rushes outside, he finds only a single red balloon floating where no balloon should be, a now iconic symbol that the entity is near. Meanwhile, Halloran enters the mind of Taniel, Rose's nephew, and learns the full origin story, that the entity crashed into this place long ago, that it grew stronger through cycles of feeding, and that Native Americans finally imprisoned it beneath what would eventually become Derry, using a system of sacred stone pillars. Taniel reveals that the entity is currently rooted in the house on Neibolt Street, a location that fans of the films and novel will instantly recognize as one of Derry's central haunted sites. General Shaw tells Leroy his real plan: to seize the pillars that contain the entity and repurpose that power as a weapon in the Cold War, a concept that exposes his inability to see evil as anything other than a strategic resource. The children meet Matty again at their secret spot, where he claims that Phil is still alive somewhere in the sewers, tempting them with hope, even though viewers have good reason to suspect that nothing about Matty is trustworthy anymore. The Native Americans warn that every time the entity wakes, a catastrophic act occurs before it returns to rest for 27 years, turning Derry's history into a repeating pattern of mass tragedy that people choose to forget. Rose begs Shaw to stop his pursuit, telling him that trying to control this force will only unleash more devastation. But he refuses, convinced that fear can be managed like any other weapon system. Hank is sent toward Shawshank Prison, but the bus crashes, allowing him to escape into the wilderness. Another example of how chaos follows any attempt to contain things in this story. The children, joined by Matty and Marge, venture into the sewers to find Phil, taking pills from Lily's mother's prescription that leave them disoriented and vulnerable right when they most need clear minds. A dangerous human mistake layered on top of supernatural risk. The military enters the underground tunnels as well, with Taniel guiding them, but the mission rapidly falls apart as the environment itself turns against them. The children find the remains of some of their missing friends, and then watch in horror as Matty's form twists and shifts, revealing Pennywise beneath the familiar face, forcing them into a frantic escape through the maze of tunnels. Leroy and Polly encounter the fleeing kids, and Leroy, now primed to distrust everything he sees, believes they are illusions created by the entity and almost fires on them. Polly, recognizing the truth, steps in to protect the children and pays with his life when Pennywise strikes. The creature nearly reaches Lily, but one of the sacred pillars flares with power and blocks Pennywise, forcing him to retreat, showing that ancient protections still have some bite even against such a powerful being. Hank reaches Ingrid Kirsch and tells her how she can help him escape justice, sending Ingrid toward Charlotte and the Hanlons with her own agenda. Halloran emerges from the sewers, witnessing the cost of their failure, and sees Polly's body, understanding that his connection to the supernatural has once again failed to save everyone. Leroy, terrified for his son, scolds Will for going down into the sewers and orders him to stay on base, but Will refuses to sit back while his friends are in danger, leading to an argument where Leroy loses control and slaps him, dramatizing how fear erodes even loving relationships. Lily shows the group the pillar that saved her, and insists they must return underground to finish what they started and destroy the entity, while Ronnie pushes back, convinced that they are in way over their heads, splitting the group between reckless courage and survival instinct. Hank hides at the Black Spot, a club serving Derry's black community, waiting for Charlotte to help him escape the town, while Halloran grows more frustrated, knowing history is about to repeat an atrocity he has sensed in the town's psychic atmosphere. When Leroy suggests using Halloran's abilities to locate all the pillars and complete Shaw's mission, Halloran reacts with fury, knowing that he is being treated as a tool to be pushed past his limits for a plan he knows is morally wrong. Marge confronts her former clique, the Pattycakes, as she grows closer to Rich and slowly abandons the shallow protection of popularity for genuine connection. A character arc that mirrors Derry's demand that people choose what truly matters when survival is not guaranteed. Lily discovers that Ingrid was actually the clown they saw in one of their photos, because Ingrid is searching for her missing father, Bob Gray, the original human Pennywise from the early 20th century, whom the entity absorbed. Ingrid reveals that in 1935 she saw the clown wearing her father's face take the life of a little girl at Juniper Hill, and she coped with that trauma by convincing herself that this thing was still her father in some twisted way, turning her into a willing servant of the evil that destroyed her family. She tries to convince Lily to embrace the same logic, promising that the entity can take her father's form and erase her grief. But Lily rejects the idea and runs away, choosing painful truth over comforting lies. Meanwhile, the demoted Chief Bowers receives a tip that Hank is at the Black Spot and leads a masked mob toward the club, setting up the racist attack that later becomes part of Derry's dark timeline and of Halloran's memories in It. From this point, the story accelerates toward its finale. Pennywise's influence surges after the military's interference with the ancient cage that helps contain it, and the town is plunged into an unnatural icy fog as if winter has been summoned overnight. While Derry freezes under this eerie weather, Pennywise exerts control over the adults, keeping them distracted and distant while he directs the underclassmen of Derry High into the school gymnasium, gathering them like livestock for a mass feeding. Using the principal's body like a macabre puppet, Pennywise turns a place of learning into a stage for terror. But notably, Lily, Ronnie, and Marge are absent because they have skipped school after the traumatic events at the Black Spot, which ironically saves them from immediate danger and positions them as the only kids able to fight back. The girls realize that Pennywise is moving to end this cycle with one more massive act before hibernating for another 27 years, and they know the shard connected to the pillars is their only chance. Meanwhile, on the adult side, Leroy, Charlotte, Halloran, and Rose coordinate a desperate plan. Rose explains that the shard must be driven into an ancient tree that links to the chain of stones forming the entity's prison, essentially repairing the cage that Shaw's meddling has weakened. She also warns that the shard exerts a corrosive influence on anyone who holds it for too long, slowly unbalancing their mind, which explains Lily's growing irritability and paranoia toward her own friends at the moment when unity is most necessary. This detail turns the shard into more than just a magical object. It becomes a test of emotional resilience, showing that even tools meant for protection can be dangerous. The climax unfolds on the frozen river near the woods, a liminal space where the natural world and the supernatural overlap completely. The ice beneath everyone's feet functions both literally and metaphorically. One wrong step and everything shatters. Pennywise confronts the kids, and Marge is shown a vision of her future son, Richie Tozier, confirming the link between this prequel and the Losers Club we already know, and revealing that her family line will remain entangled with Derry's fate. Time for Pennywise does not move linearly. Past, present, and future all blur into an eternal hunting ground, which is why the entity can taunt Marge with knowledge of things she has not yet lived. From a distance, Halloran strains his psychic abilities to shield the children, nearly collapsing from the effort, showing that helping others with the shine always costs him something vital. The situation worsens when the army opens fire in panic and confusion, and their bullets kill Daniel and injure Leroy, proving once again that human institutions make everything worse when they try to fight what they do not understand with brute force. Pennywise experiences an internal nightmare that may hint toward future seasons, but he quickly tears free and focuses on Shaw, recognizing him at last as the boy he once stalked in the woods decades earlier. When Shaw, still clinging to his fantasy of control, essentially tells Pennywise that he is now free to go wherever he wants, the entity responds by taking the form of the galoo that traumatized Shaw as a child, showing that it never forgets a taste of fear. All of Shaw's medals, strategies, and rank mean nothing in that moment. The show underlines that fear strips away every illusion of power and exposes who people really are. Cornered and wounded, Pennywise morphs into a monstrous dragon or bat-like form, a visual that nods toward the wider Stephen King multiverse and especially the Dark Tower's cosmic scale of horror. This transformation marks the apex of spectacle in the season, but the true turning point comes not from the adults or the military, but from the kids and the dead. As the creature closes in and the ice begins to crack, Rich Santos returns in spectral form, accompanied by Sesqui from the spirit world, and rushes in like an unexpected hero to help his friends carry the shard the final distance to the tree. His arrival reframes his earlier death not as meaningless tragedy, but as part of a larger pattern of sacrifice and solidarity across time. Together, with Rich's help, they drive the shard into the heart of the ancient tree, completing the circuit that powers the stone pillars and reinforcing the cage around the entity. Pennywise is forced back, defeated but explicitly not destroyed, and the icy fog lifts as warmth returns to Derry, leaving behind a town that will forget almost everything that just happened, as it always does. In the aftermath, Derry returns to an eerie sort of normality, with people walking the streets as if they had not just been frozen in place by an inhuman will. The teenagers at the high school do not remember being herded into the gym, which suggests that the entity's power extends to erasing entire collective experiences, leaving only faint unease. Lily and Marge remain in Derry, trying to rebuild some kind of ordinary life after having looked directly into the heart of the town's curse, while Will's family initially prepares to leave, but ultimately decides to stay, ensuring that Will later become the father of Mike Hanlon, the librarian and historian who will help lead the Losers Club. Ronnie and her father Hank, still a fugitive in the eyes of Derry's authorities, get help from Rose to escape toward the Canadian border, a small pocket of hope for a family that the town tried to turn into monsters. Ronnie and Will share a gentle goodbye kiss, marking the end of their shared childhood in a place that has forced all of them to grow up too fast. Lily finally lets go of the guilt she carried about her father's death, understanding that the entity exploited her grief but did not define her story. Halloran chooses to leave the military and accept work at a hotel in London, a subtle but chilling setup for his later connection to the Overlook, and a sign that he understands some places and some battles cannot be managed through official chains of command. The season's last sting comes in an epilogue set in 1988, when Ingrid Kirsch, now elderly, receives a visit from Beverly Marsh, tying the show directly back into the timeline of the films and underlining that Derry's story is never truly over. The scene reinforces the central theme that evil in this town is cyclical and consistent. It adapts to each new era, but its hunger remains the same. For the characters of Welcome to Derry, Pennywise has been pushed back into the depths, but for future generations, especially the Losers Club, the fight is still ahead. The entity does not age, does not forget, and does not forgive, and somewhere beneath the town, it waits, patient and eternal. In the end, what truly sets this series apart is the way it treats fear, not just as a tool for scares, but as a language that every character speaks in a different way. For Leroy, fear is tied to responsibility and the terror of failing his family, especially when the threats he faces are both human prejudice and supernatural forces he can barely understand. For Charlotte, fear is the cost of standing up against injustice in a place that punishes anyone who dares to challenge the status quo, and yet she never stops pushing back, even as the town turns colder around her. Lily carries the fear of her own mind, wondering whether her visions are madness or a warning, and the series uses her struggle as a way to question how society treats people who see truths that others refuse to acknowledge. Ronnie's fear is rooted in loyalty and the possibility of losing the people she loves, especially when her own father becomes a target of suspicion in a town that would rather blame a convenient scapegoat than confront the darkness beneath its streets. Marge is afraid of slipping from popularity into invisibility, and her arc reveals how shallow power crumbles when confronted with real horror, forcing her to choose between cruelty and compassion. Rich wrestles with fear of not belonging, as an outsider by culture and personality, yet he becomes one of the emotional anchors of the group, and ultimately, a symbol of selfless courage. Even Ingrid represents a distorted version of fear, Someone who has made a bargain with the monster because accepting the creature as family feels easier than confronting unbearable loss, turning her into a tragic warning of what happens when grief curdles into devotion to the very thing that caused it. The town of Derry itself almost functions as a character, a place that constantly chooses denial over truth, comfort over accountability. The adults repeatedly look away from what is happening right in front of them, and that willful blindness becomes the perfect environment for Pennywise to thrive, suggesting that the real horror is not just that a monster exists, but that people quietly agree to live with it as long as they can pretend it is not there. The military storyline with Shaw and Halloran shows another kind of blindness. The arrogance of believing that something as ancient and unknowable as it can be turned into a controllable asset, a weapon instead of a warning. By framing the entity in strategic terms, the show criticizes how institutions often try to harness destructive power instead of eliminating it. Shaw's obsession with fear as a tactical advantage ultimately becomes his downfall, because he never truly respects what he is dealing with. He treats it like a project, not a predator. Halloran, on the other hand, is forced to confront the ethical cost of using his gift in service of people who do not care about the consequences. And that conflict plants the seeds for the more cautious, haunted man he will become later in life. His decision to leave for that hotel in London is not just a setup for another story. It is the choice of someone who understands that some evils cannot be contained by orders, bullets, or cages of stone. So now that you have walked through the entire first season of it, welcome to Derry. From Matty's desperate flight on a lonely road to Beverly's knock on Ingrid's door decades later, what does this story say to you about fear and memory? Does seeing the long history of Derry and the earlier generation that tried to contain Pennywise make the creature more terrifying because you feel the weight of its cycles? Or does pulling back the curtain and exposing its patterns make it less mysterious for you as a viewer? Share in the comments whether you see yourself more in the kids who stay and fight or in the ones who choose to leave town. And if you were in Derry during this cycle, would you risk everything to try to stop an ancient evil? Or grab your things, get in the car, and never look back? Ever look?